Welcome into the Pick and Roll NBA podcast with Jet and Sap, presented by Full Press Coverage. Today is the day after the NBA trading deadline, so some dust starting to settle in the NBA, seeing what the teams are looking like with their new rosters, and there may be some additions still to come, as the buyout market should be pretty active, mostly from guys who, thought you might get traded and didn't end up getting a deal. So we're going to start off the show talking about the biggest names that are hitting the buyout market. The one everybody's been talking about hasn't quite happened just yet, but it's imminent because there's a list of teams he's meeting with, and that's Andre Drummond. The details of how much money he's going to give back, I don't think are fully out there yet, but he's going to have to give some back. Otherwise, Cleveland's not going to, help him go to a good team just out of the kindness of their hearts. Reports are Andre Drummond's meeting with the Lakers, the Clippers, and then a couple of surprise teams, the Celtics, Hornets, and Knicks. Sap, why is he meeting with the Celtics, Hornets, and Knicks?
That's a good point, Jeff, because if he's interested in trying to win a championship, you keep the conversation to the Lakers, Clippers, maybe even open up talks with Brooklyn, although it seems like Brooklyn has pretty much solidified their roster. I have no idea why he's looking at going to the Celtics, the Knicks, or Charlotte. I don't think any of those teams are going to sniff the conference finals, let alone the NBA finals. If he was going to look at someplace else, maybe Miami would have been a good option. But Miami has Bam Adebayo, who's outstanding at center, much more versatile than Andre Drummond. Drummond does add a lot. I mean, he has his flaws, right? He's an old school center, but he's a guy who's averaged 17, 18 points per game, 13, 14 rebounds. He has a liability at the free throw line, which is an issue in tight games, but maybe he's not going to be on the court in tight games in the postseason. I think he ends up with the Lakers. They really do need him because we're not going to see Anthony Davis probably for another 3 weeks. We may not see LeBron for another month. And the Lakers are quickly losing ground in the Western Conference. They're only 2 games ahead of Dallas for the 9 seed in the Western Conference. So you want to avoid that at all costs. So I think that's something you have to kind of play around with. I take that back. They're 2 games behind Dallas for the 7 seed, so they don't want to dip into the 7 seed because it's part of that 1 game type play-in. So they need to make some move or they're just going to lose contact with the contenders. And you've said it a million times, as long as they're in the postseason and LeBron and AD are healthy, that they should be fine. But I'm still concerned if they're 7, 8, 9, or 10 with that real crazy 1 game type play-in. So I think Drummond goes to the Lakers or the Clippers. The Clippers made, I think, a really good move at the trade deadline in acquiring Rajon Rondo. I think he gives them that veteran leadership that they lack. And we'll see what happens. But is there any explanation that you can think of why Drummond would want to play for the Celtics, the Hornets, or the Knicks? Other than the Knicks, we're going to have a lot of money next year. So, maybe he signs long-term with the Knicks, but the Knicks going to do that for Andre Drummond?
Yeah, the only explanations I can think of is the agent wants to have a good relationship with those teams, so he's doing his agent a favor, or that as a condition of the buyout, he couldn't make it obvious he was going to the Lakers, just saying come on, give us a break here, because the Cavs, I don't think have the greatest relationship in the world with the Lakers because LeBron is there, and they took their baby in free agency, LeBron James, the son of Akron. So I think it's just for it's got to be a favor to his agent or something to be save face for the Cavs to make it seem like, hey, I gave these other teams a chance. They could have had me. I didn't like their pitches. What realistically, what are the Hornets or the Celtics or even the Knicks going to pitch them? I guess the Knicks could say, yeah, we have a lot of money, like you mentioned, Sap. We can pay you the most. But what's the Celtics pitch? We'll play you, but probably not as much as you'd like, and we're also going to lose in the first round. But hey, you get to play for a coach that's going to get fired after the postseason's over. I don't know what the real appeal would be in Charlotte.
You're so pessimistic, Jed. I thought you would have talked yourself off the bridge from last night after the moves that Danny Ainge made, but you appear to be even in worse shape today than you were yesterday. Yeah, I don't get it. And I think you bring up a great point. Let's throw 5 teams out there, So it looks like we're doing our due diligence, but in the end, it's going to be the Lakers or the Clippers. Because
Right.
I
It's
would think in
like
that
when
situation,
Anthony Davis came up with his list, right, of teams
right.
he'd be traded to. He's like, yeah, I'd go to the Bucks. Sure, why not? He threw a dart at a board of the United States and was like, yeah, the Bulls, maybe I'd go there. He's just making it up.
Well, it's kind of like Russell Wilson with the Seahawks. His agent put up 4 potential destinations, and we never really bought into like 2 of them, or even at this point 3 of them, because a lot of those teams already addressed their quarterback needs. So you're just doing due diligence.
He was like the
and ends
Raiders.
up
Like
with the
no
Lakers.
one believed that.
No, or the Bears, who, you know what, if Russell Wilson went to the Bears, he'd cease being a great quarterback. They've never had a great quarterback in my lifetime. And the Cowboys, you knew were going to re-sign Dak Prescott. In New Orleans, they're going to move on from Drew Brees to Russell Wilson and the ramifications of the salary cap. But back to basketball, I think in the end, Drummond ends up with the Lakers or the Clippers. That makes the most sense, doesn't it? Because those are still the 2 best teams in the Western Conference when healthy.
Yeah, I think so. And I think it's always been the Lakers. I mean, I don't know that the Clippers have anybody on their team that's nearly the recruiter that LeBron James is. So if, it comes down to that, then obviously the edge goes to the Lakers because he's a tremendous recruiter. He's shown that throughout the course of his career. So, yeah, I think it's the Lakers. I think it's been the Lakers for a while. All this other stuff seems like window dressing to me. Like he's, just sort of, it wasn't always the Lakers. I like you too, Charlotte. I've maybe buy some of my jerseys and buy my Laker jersey, Charlotte fans. Yeah, I really think it's the Lakers. If I was going to Vegas and had to put down some money, that's where I would put down. I wouldn't even spread it around. I would just put it all on the Lakers. The Clippers, I like, again, what they did with Rondo, like you said. I don't, is he going to like really be super motivated? Like what's Kawhi or Paul George going to say to him? I mean, I think that LeBron is the key here. If LeBron wants Andre Drummond, he'll probably get Andre Drummond.
He's tough to say no to, right? LeBron. And again, you wouldn't think Kawhi would be a great recruiter. I'm shocked at that. The man doesn't communicate. How could he possibly recruit? He's nearly silent most of the time, right? He doesn't have that skill set. Marvelous basketball player, but he's not what I would think of as a personality that's going to go out and recruit. LeBron's the best at that. He hasn't always succeeded. He tried to get Paul George, and that didn't work out. And maybe he benefited from not getting Paul George. He did get the player he wanted more than any, and that was Anthony Davis. So I think Drummond goes to the Lakers. They need him. You could be looking at a starting lineup in the postseason of Drummond, Anthony Davis at the 4, who's much more comfortable there than playing center. LeBron could play the 3, but he kind of plays every position. And then you get Schroeder and KCP in the backcourt, and your bench would have the likes of Harrell, Gasol, THT, Caruso. That's a pretty good bench as well. So I think that they would be in really good shape to get back to the finals.
Yeah, the Lakers offer him, it's not just the fact that they offer him a championship. They probably offer him the biggest role of those teams too, maybe outside of the Hornets. The Knicks the Knicks are such a weird team to put on there other than money. So, I mean, I guess he would play a big role in that team, but it doesn't really make much sense. The Celtics, you would imagine he'd be splitting time with Robert Williams and Tristan Thompson. So, like, it's not like there's a ton of playing time available for him there. So I don't know why that's attractive to him at all. And, the Clippers have Zubac, who's a good center. So, I mean, the Lakers are desperate for size, and he provides it. So I think, listen, playing in LA, you get the nice weather. You get a team that has serious championship potential. You get to play with LeBron, and you have the biggest role. It seems like a no-brainer to me, unless he's very concerned about making more money, but he just got a big contract buyout. He's a free agent in the offseason. So the only way I could see him not signing with the Lakers is if his only priority is money.
Right. He's made a ton of money already, and I'm sure he'll be able to get a good contract going forward. This is your opportunity to try to win a championship. But the big question is, how important is that to him? Is money the most important thing, which in general it is? And I agree with players. That's, what you're going to have when you retire, and you can have generational wealth. But when you get that opportunity to play with the best player of all time, in my opinion, in LeBron James, go for it.
the guy who money is their top priority typically don't take a buyout of their contract,
Correct.
where they're giving money back. So I would be pretty surprised if that's his main priority in this brief, I guess, free agency period he'll have. But he's going to meet with those teams again: Lakers, Celtics, Hornets, Clippers, and Knicks. We'll see how that shakes out. But again, if the smart money would be on the Lakers, I would be really surprised to see it be any of those other teams.
Mm-hmm.
I'd be downright shocked if it's the Celtics, Hornets, or Knicks. The other big name, maybe less effective player than Drummond, I would say at this point in his career, but certainly the more accomplished over the course of his career, is LaMarcus Aldridge. He's getting bought out by the Spurs. He is going to meet with the Heat, the Lakers also, Clippers, and Nets. The house money seems to be on Miami here. Where do you think LaMarcus Aldridge ends up? And do you think LaMarcus Aldridge is helpful to a team that he ends up with?
I think it's going to be Miami. I think he can help somewhat. I don't think he's going to be a big impact signing. I think Drummond can mean more to the Lakers than Aldridge does to the Miami Heat. And speaking about recruiters, who's a better recruiter than Pat Riley? There's not many. I think Pat Riley and Jerry West are probably the two best executives in the NBA as far as being recruiters. Now, West is with the LA Clippers, so you've got LA to sell, and Pat Riley has Miami to sell. That's a good start there. It's not like you're trying to sell, Coal City in the Midwest. I would think that Aldridge ends up in Miami. That seems to be where all the reports are that he is going to go. He looks like he is well past his prime, maybe 3 or 4 years past his prime. He's always appeared to me to be a guy that was never in great shape. He's a skilled guy, but not an athletic guy. But I think he could be a nice piece for the Miami Heat. You add him to Butler and Adebayo. I don't think he gives him a big three. He's not that type of player anymore, but certainly a veteran player that has a nice mid-range game. And they've got some three-point shooters there, obviously, and Duncan Robinson and Tyler Hero. So I think he could fit into Miami. And they're a team, I think, if they could make that one more move, they'd really solidify being the 4 seed in the Eastern Conference. And with those types of players, with that coaching staff, with how tough they are, they would still be a tough out for even Brooklyn. Brooklyn would beat them in the second round. I'm not even, going to doubt that, but they put them through a lot because that's a tough-minded team. I think he ends up in Miami. That makes the most sense.
Yeah, he's dropped off a lot even from last season where he averaged 19 points a game and 7 rebounds a game. This year he's averaging 13 and 4.5 rebounds. So a pretty significant drop off. He's 35. He still can do some stuff. I think that he's a guy that you don't want to be playing more than 20 minutes a game if you have to. So I think he'll fit on Miami. I mean, they just traded away Olenek. He's not as good of a 3-point shooter, but he's just as good of a mid-range shooter. He's probably a little bit of a better rebounder than Olenek. So I could see him playing that role, no problem. I think he'd be a good fit for Miami. Interesting that he's meeting with the Lakers, Clippers, and Nets as well. Obviously, his intentions are pretty clear. He wants to play for a team that has, a shot at winning a championship. He has never won one in his career with Portland and San Antonio. Is there any chance you think he ends up on either any of those teams, or you think it's just Miami all the way?
I would think Miami all the way, although if the Lakers aren't able to get Drummond, is Aldridge a decent second prize? Again, I don't think he offers you the rebounding that Drummond does, and the Lakers need to do that now. The Lakers have some issues. Even when healthy, they have not been a good three-point shooting team this year. Their defense against the three-pointer is still very, very good. That's where they, the two of those combined was a big reason when they won the championship last year. He may be the second prize, right? If you want Drummond and you can't get him, then Aldridge is the next best piece. I would think that Aldridge will fit in better in Miami. But we're at the point now, Jet, where Brooklyn, the Clippers, and the Lakers are in on everyone, right? I mean, they're in that situation where they're going to try to win a ring, and these players that are going to be in the buyout market, as you said, are going to try to win a ring as well. So those are all perfect marriages. Miami seems to make the most sense. And I think, again, Pat Riley's a great recruiter. I mean, you sit down with the Don, right, the Godfather. I think that, he can sell LaMarcus Aldridge on Miami and the culture they've built there over the years since Riley's been there.
Let me throw out a couple more names at you. Not as sexy as the last two, Sap, but you tell me of these guys if any of them interests you. If you're a team, trying to, I guess, compete or contend. Avery Bradley, Kelly Olynyk, Otto Porter Jr. Of those three guys, who would you most want if you're a contending team?
I've always been a huge fan of Avery Bradley, and I think last year, before the pandemic, he was playing really good basketball for the Lakers. He can hit 3-pointers. He also could defend 3-pointers. I don't know what the relationship is now with the Lakers because he did not go to the bubble. He's got a young child who I think is somewhat sickly that he wanted to spend time with, and I always support anyone that does that over their profession. I don't think that would leave him on bad terms with the Lakers. I think he could be a useful piece. Olynyk is someone who is averaging 10 points, 7 rebounds a game in about 26 minutes. With the Heat, now he's on Houston. Houston's kind of like a clearinghouse for all these players, right? They go to Houston and then they want to get the hell out of there. Houston's in the most like ridiculous rebuild I think I've ever seen. They got rid of one of the best players and didn't get much in return, so they're god awful now. Otto Porter Jr. He's a guy who's drafted very high and keeps moving around, so I'm not really sold on him. Bradley on the right team could be a nice addition as well. And again, I go back to the Lakers because they need some 3-point shooting. Now they need someone who can kind of back up Schroeder because they were somewhat in on Kyle Lowry. That didn't work. Maybe the Lakers go add another veteran. The Lakers are all about veterans at this point, right? And that's what you're going to get in the buyout market. Obviously, they weren't looking to add young players. If anything, they'll move young players or would have moved young players at the trade deadline. I think Bradley can still play. Again, is his heart into it? That's the big question. And with the pandemic, I think you've seen some players that they're there, but they're not totally there. So that's always a question to have. I think those are three guys that can help someone's bench. I think Olynyk to the Celtics makes some sense. He had good success here. He's only shooting 31% from 3 this year, which is down from his career average, which is around 37, 38%. And again, that's in a half a season. Maybe he can get those numbers to tick up a little bit. And I think Olynyk with the Celtics wouldn't be a bad fit because he's not really going to get in the way of Robert Williams. They can play together since Olynyk is a stretch 4. So I think that might be a decent addition.
You say that he's not going to get in the way of Robert Williams, but considering the way the Celtics have used Robert Williams and Brad Stevens seems so opposed to the idea, I wouldn't be surprised if Olynyk came to the Celtics and they just shelved Robert Williams in favor of Olynyk. It's just like that seems to be how it goes for whatever bizarre reason. If I'm the Celtics, yeah, I'd entertain it for because he was somewhat successful here, but I think they need more help at the backup guard spot and obviously wing depth. I'd actually be more interested in Otto Porter Jr. if I was the Celtics than I would be in Olynyk. Otto Porter Jr. is a 3-and-D guy who's not that great at either of those things. He's solid, right? This season he's shooting 40% from 3. That's pretty good. Career, he's a 40% 3-point shooter. He's only averaging 10 points a game this year, though, so you're not going to get a ton of scoring. He was the 3rd overall pick, Sap, so yes, he was a very high pick. He got way the hell overpaid by the Wizards a few years ago, like close to max contract overpaid for some bizarre reason. Yeah, I guess he could. It all depends on fit with these guys, right? If you're talking about a guy like Avery Bradley or Kelly Olynyk or Otto Porter Jr., it's a matter of what team can utilize their skill set the best, because they're not going to be guys who are skilled at a lot of different things. They might have one particular set of skills, like Liam Neeson's character in Taken, that helps a championship team. I think all three of those guys, Olynyk, Bradley, and Porter, can bring something to the bench of a team that's trying to compete. So that's where I feel like they'd all be best served, but the likelihood that all three of them end up on really good teams seems low. So we'll see. I think all of them will end up getting signed because they all have something that is, what an NBA team is looking for. Olynyk 7 feet tall. There's always a market for 7 feet tall dudes who can shoot threes. And Bradley's a rugged defender and I think a pretty well-respected veteran in the league. And Otto Porter Jr. is a 27-year-old former 3rd overall pick. So they'll end up somewhere. It's just a matter of, if a team's expecting a lot out of those guys, they're not going to be happy with the result. Kind of like, do you remember how it was a big deal when Troy Murphy was bought out, and everybody here in Boston was very excited about bringing in Troy Murphy, probably because he was Irish. And he gave them nothing, just absolutely nothing. So I think the buyout market sometimes gets a little bit overhyped in terms of this guy's going to come in and really change a lot of things. Like, there's a reason that a lot of these dudes get bought out, and it's not because they're spectacular players. It's because they have some flaw or some hole in their game. Even with Drummond, the numbers indicate, wow, look at this guy. Like, he should be an all-star every year. He's averaging a high double-double. He's the best rebounder in the league. But his defense isn't that good. His offensive game is a way throwback. So there's a reason he got traded for virtually nothing last year, and this year couldn't even be moved because no one was willing to give up anything of value for him. So I think the buyout market tends to be a little bit overplayed because they're bought out for a reason, not because they're amazing players. If they're amazing players, no one's just gonna hand them their walking papers.
No, I mean, these are just fringe players at this point, could serve as a 9th or 10th guy on a bench, whatever the case may be. So we'll see what happens with that. I think that Drummond's the best player of the group because he does have one skill that he's really good at, which is rebounding, which always is something that you need. Pat Riley famously said, no rebounds, no rings. And it still holds in today's NBA. I know that the league has changed since Pat Riley uttered those words in the 80s, but rebounding is still a pretty damn important skill set to have for an individual and for a team.
Yeah, it's massively important, and in the playoffs, those extra possessions really, really matter. So he's more of a defensive rebounder, but that gives them doesn't let the other team get second chance opportunities. So I think, listen, if he goes to the Lakers, the Lakers lose nothing and they gain a lot. So it's a great scenario for LA. I'm just saying in general, people get way too excited about the guys that they might add on the buyout market because, again, they're on the buyout market for a reason, not because they're world beaters. So we'll see how that shakes out. We'll see if there's any other names that come to the buyout list. Typically, there's not names that are very surprising, but I guess you never know. Sap, you ran a poll this week, as you're wont to do, and your poll was asking the good people of Twitter, what's the better duo, right? This was a Twitter poll. Am I correct?
Yes.
Jayson Tatum and Jaylen Brown of the Boston Celtics, or Brandon Ingram and Zion Williamson of the New Orleans Pelicans. How did the poll shake out before you and I get into this?
I think it was a fair question, right? I mean, that's a viable discussion to have.
Sure.
The people that responded, 73% said Jayson Tatum and Jaylen Brown, 27% said Zion and Brandon Ingram. Now, I will admit that was predictable. I thought it should have been in the real world, 54-46, pretty close numbers. Instead, it was 73-27. I have more Celtic fans or Celtic honks as followers than Pelicans followers and honks. And I don't even know if there are any Pelican honks out there. There are certainly a lot of Celtics honks, but 73-27 in favor of the Boston duo.
Obviously the number doesn't surprise me because, like you said, you have more Celtics fans as your followers. You have that. You've been working in this market for a while, even though you've never embraced the Celtics. So I don't know why a Celtics fan would follow you. In fact, I would actively mute you if I was a Celtics fan on Twitter.
They trolled me. They actually trolled me, which is fun. That's what Twitter's good for, to troll each other.
All you do is troll the teams in Boston, though. It's not too hard to troll the Red Sox these days, so it's not like anybody would particularly care.
And that's the one I defend the most because I'm like, we all grew up Red Sox fans. My dad was born in 1924. He died in 1999. He never saw the Red Sox win a World Series. You guys, in your early 30s have seen them win 4 World Series and are complaining. I'm like, it hasn't been a bad franchise since John Henry and that group bought it back in 2002. It's been 20 years, 4 World Series. That's pretty good. They're actually the one I defend more than the others. It's not just the 4 World Series, Sep.
They're 4-0 in the World Series since I've been alive. They've never lost.
Yeah, they're like Jordan in the NBA Finals. 6-0 for Jordan, 4-0 for the Red Sox, and none of those series have gone to a seventh game, right? I mean, they swept the Cardinals in 2004. They swept Colorado in 2007. They beat the Cardinals in 6 games in 2013. Then they beat the Dodgers in 5 in 2018.
Yeah, they've run roughshod through every team.
They're 16-3 in the World Series. It's like a fait accompli that Red Sox get to the World Series, they're going to win. Now, for older Red Sox fans, it was they'd get to the World Series and lose in 7 games, which they did in 1946, 67, 75, and 86. So I somewhat defend the Red Sox. I will never forgive them for trading Mookie Betts, which is going to go down as the dumbest move they've made since selling Babe Ruth 100 years ago. But I defend the organization somewhat because they've been successful, certainly more successful over the last 20 years than the Celtics, who seem to have all this goodwill built up among their fan base, and certainly better than the Bruins, who have a lot of goodwill built up from their fan base. The Patriots are a different situation. When you go to 9 Super Bowls and win 6 in a 20-year period, it's really tough to knock them. But, yeah, the one team I will defend is the Red Sox. So, yeah, I don't have a lot of Boston fans that like what I have to say or write. Remember, the first column I ever wrote for the Boston Herald was 6.5 years ago, and it was LeBron is greater than Larry Bird. And I just remember walking into the newsroom at the Herald and having every old white guy look at me like they wanted to bite my head off. I think 7 years later, I've been,
that was a good way to ingratiate yourself to the, to the community.
Yeah.
I think that was really
absolutely.
good.
First column, this a-hole is coming out with what?
I'm shocked with some of the columns they let you write. They let you write one about like who you'd want to go to dinner with in all of history. They just let you write whatever the hell you wanted.
Pretty much, yeah. It was funny because
maybe that's why the paper's in the state it is today.
Yeah, you got me putting down like 3 dinner guests, because that's a question I like to always ask people. Like, if you had your choice, 3 dinner guests, it could be people that are alive, people that are dead, fictitious characters. Pick anybody, and mine were Thomas Jefferson, Leonardo da Vinci, and Richard Nixon. And then I put together how the dinner would go, and it was kind of a very fun column. Yeah, they let me write pretty much whatever I wanted. I think they just thought I was a nuisance and said, yeah, just let the guy write whatever he wants. No one's going to read him anyway. No one takes him seriously. I was just a page filler on Sundays.
Mine currently would be Brad Stevens, Wick Grousbeck, and Danny Ainge, and it would be the most uncomfortable dinner ever. It would just be a lot of silence, a lot of side eyes and stink eyes, a lot of scowling, me just throwing up my hands and saying, why are you doing this to me? But that's who I would choose. Those 3.
And those guys would need food tasters too, with you involved.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah.
Probably
I wouldn't try
to. I wouldn't try to kill them, but I wouldn't want them to have the most comfortable bathroom experience.
No, I would warn them.
Say. So I kind of have a sense of where you're going with this poll question, Sap, based off of your history and your columns. Why are Brandon Ingram and Zion Williamson a better duo than Jayson Tatum and Jaylen Brown?
Okay, as far as the numbers go, it's incredible how close they are. This year alone, and that's a half a season, but that's a really good sample size because this is Zion Williamson's second year in the league, and I think he's just continually getting better. In terms of points per game, New Orleans duo is averaging 50 per game. Boston's 49.5. Boston leads in rebounding 12.5 to 12.1. They lead in assist 8.2 to 8.1. They're both shooting 38% from 3. Now, Zion doesn't really take threes, but Brandon Ingram's damn good at it. A couple of reasons
he should take threes. He's not bad at it.
His first game in the league,
first game he canned
like
4. Yeah.
In the first half, I'm sure he could do this. You also can run your offense through Zion. The Celtics lost to New Orleans about a month ago, and in the second half, and the Celtics were up by 20 at some point in that game. They decided to run their offense through Zion. He's a really good passer, as is Brandon Ingram.
26.
Yeah. That was probably the worst loss of the year, which is pretty tough to do in the NBA. I don't care who you're playing, even if it's Zion and Brandon Ingram. One of the reasons I like the New Orleans duo is their age. Zion is 20, Brandon Ingram is 23. Jayson Tatum's also 23 for the Celtics, and Jaylen Brown's 24. So the New Orleans duo is a little bit younger, so I think they have more room to grow. I think of the 4 players, Zion is going to be the best player. I think Ingram and Brown are nearly a wash, right? I mean, they were in the same draft. Ingram was the second pick. Jaylen Brown was the third pick. And I think if you look at their careers, they're pretty similar. I mean, pick whichever one you like. I think Ingram's a more natural scorer. I think Brown's a slightly better defender, but I think one for one, they're pretty equal. I think Zion is going to be better than Jayson Tatum. Tatum is wildly skilled. I don't see the desire in Jayson Tatum to be as great as he can be. I do see that with Zion, and I think that's the biggest reason I would take the New Orleans duo over the Celtics duo.
Yeah, I get Zion having the highest ceiling. I mean, that's sort of hard to argue. He was the number 1 overall pick in the draft, and his ceiling seems like it could be as high as he wants it to be. The biggest question with Zion, and it's a question that you don't really have to ask of the other guys on this list, especially the 2 Celtics guys, is durability. Zion has questions about the shape he's in. I don't think anybody's asked questions about the shape that Jaylen Brown's been in since he was probably in middle school.
No.
And Jayson Tatum's in tremendous shape too. I mean, he's not the muscular dude that Jaylen Brown is, but he's put on muscle and weight since he's coming in the NBA. And
that's
so
a perfect NBA physique. Jayson Tatum to me is the perfect NBA physique, right? 6'10", long, strong, but not muscle bound. Jaylen Brown's more athletic than Jayson Tatum, but Jayson Tatum is like the perfect NBA build. He's stronger than Kevin Durant, but then again, so is pretty much everybody else in the league. And as Durant said during the draft process, when he couldn't even bench press like 190 pounds once, he goes, "The basketball's not that heavy, so I can deal with that."
Yeah,
Ingram reminds me a lot of a poor man's Kevin Durant. In fact, when he was coming out of Duke, Kevin Durant says,
everybody compared him to. Yeah,
Kevin Durant says, "Man, it looks like I'm looking in the mirror when I see this guy." Now, obviously, he's not Kevin Durant, but he's a poor man's version of him. But that's a compliment. So, but the Zion durability factor is a concern. He's 6'7", listed at 285. He may be heavier. He's a monster. He's so explosive, but he's going to have to keep tabs on his weight. And living in New Orleans isn't exactly the best city to live in to watch your weight. I mean, the cuisine in New Orleans is second to none. So he's going to have to be careful with that. I do think his ceiling is the highest. And I'm also going to throw one more thing in, Jet. I think as a recruiter for potential free agents, Zion would be the best of the 4.
Yet Tatum is incredibly popular amongst his peers, and he is also all over the place now. He's got a Subway commercial. He's on the cover of Ruffles potato chips. So he's got star power, and Jaylen Brown is the vice president of the Players Association, and somebody I think that a lot of players respect what he has to say and speaks out about.
I wonder though, okay, I love Jaylen Brown. You know that. He's my favorite Celtic, one of my 5 favorite players in the league. I wonder if that could sometimes be a turnoff, because Chris Paul's been the president of the Players Association, and a player in that position, I wonder if he turns some people off. Jaylen Brown's incredibly bright. He was the valedictorian of his high school. Maybe some of the players look and say, "This guy's a know-it-all. I don't want to put up with that."
Maybe I think also he's a natural leader. I think that might be more about what it is. But
absolutely,
he hasn't really had the ability to try to recruit a guy yet. So I don't know. Also, Zion's got a tremendous personality. He's he's a great kid. But I don't know anything like that he stands for or what he's about, other than he really likes playing basketball and is a happy guy.
At the beginning of the pandemic, though, when the NBA shut down for a while, he contributed 1 month's pay for all the workers at the arena that the Pelicans play in. That's great. So, I mean, look, the NBA players are great at that. They are far better than any other athlete. We know Tatum is, very conscious. Tatum is going to run for the U.S. Senate someday. And if he does, and I'm still alive, I'll go help him.
Brown, you mean?
I mean, Brown. Tatum's not running for the Senate. No, I don't picture Tatum running for the Senate. Brown's going to run for the Senate. Tatum to me is just this incredibly talented guy who's been incredibly productive. I mean, one of the best looking players in the league. I mean, like, the girls love him. Like, my niece is in her late 30s. She thinks he's like the hottest guy in the NBA. Like, the women love Jayson Tatum. He's a likable guy. He's almost like your little brother that's grown up and you go, wow, this guy's really accomplished. But Zion has that personality, doesn't he? Where he's just like, he's got kind of a Shaq type personality that you can't help but like him because he's so big and strong, and his skill set. There haven't been a lot of players in the history of the league that are like that, right? I mean,
yeah. So this, in terms of my argument, Sap, I guess it's less about Zion. The durability is a concern for me, and more about Brandon Ingram. Do you know how many times Brandon Ingram has been to the playoffs in his NBA career?
0.
That's zero. That's correct. He's been to 0 postseasons. I think that there is a reason behind that. This year, the Pelicans have been disappointing. They were extremely disappointing in the bubble. The expanded bubble was created specifically for the Pelicans to try to get into the playoffs. They did not. Brandon Ingram didn't deliver when he was with LeBron James, who has elevated basically every teammate he's ever been with, except for his first year with the Lakers, where they were disappointing. And
Chris
they
Bosh.
couldn't make the
And
playoffs.
Chris Bosh never elevated with LeBron. He had to take a step back, but Bosh was already a multiple-time All-Star.
Did win championships there at least.
They did. And Ingram, again, that's a great point that he's never been to the postseason. Obviously, Zion is in his second year. But now
and
go ahead.
I was going to say, as crappy as this year has gone for the Celtics, Brown and Tatum have had postseason success, been to the postseason and been successful into the postseason. In Tatum's first year, he was a star in the playoffs for the Celtics. And here's Brandon Ingram, who hasn't even been to the playoffs, let alone get to the conference finals.
That Celtic team was better than any Laker team that Ingram played on. And I get LeBron was there 2 years ago, but then LeBron got hurt on Christmas Day of 2018. And the Lakers were the 4 seed when that happened. I think if LeBron didn't get hurt that year, they would have made the playoffs. But here's the thing with the 4 players we're talking about, right? Now they're the lead dogs of their franchises, right? Tatum and Brown in Boston, Zion and Ingram in New Orleans. They're undisputably, these are the 2 best players in Boston, the 2 best players in New Orleans. Their records aren't that different this year. The Celtics are 21-23. New Orleans is 19-24 in what I think is a tougher Western Conference. So they have had playoff success, but they've always had veteran players around them that they've been able to feed off of, whether it was Al Horford or Gordon Hayward or Kemba Walker last year. So they've played on better teams than this current New Orleans team, or even when Brandon Ingram was in LA, outside of that 2.5 month stretch where LeBron was healthy.
And also, on that LeBron team too, that was his 3rd year in the league. Everybody's expecting Ingram to really get going. He started his career slower than a lot of people expected, especially for the number 2 overall pick. 9 points a game his first year, 16 his second year. And then the 3rd year, LeBron comes in and they're like, okay, he's really going to pick it up. He's the second option to LeBron. He only goes for 18 points a game. He shoots 67% from the free throw line.
That's not good.
Again, like you said with Tatum, there does seem to be a sense of apathy with Ingram too, in my mind, in terms of
is it a Duke thing?
A lot of skills. Maybe it's a Duke thing. I don't know.
Outside of Zion, seems to be an outlier. The Duke guys think that their shit is ice cream. We know that. We get that from Christian Laettner going forward. Grant Hill was kind of an outlier, but Grant Hill was just a very unique individual. But most of the Duke guys, their opinion of themselves is through the roof. Obviously, Kyrie Irving probably more so than any. So maybe it's a Duke thing where it's almost like they're playing down by joining the NBA. Like Duke is the pinnacle of their career, and then they go to the NBA, and it's never the same. I think Zion's a little bit different. Zion's just got a different personality than Ingram or Tatum.
Yeah, it might be a Duke thing. It's not a bad thought. It does seem to be. There's obviously that air of arrogance that comes with Duke and Coach K and all that stuff. So yeah, and I mean, if you're being recruited by Duke, you're one of the very, very best players in the country. So it's it's a big deal. I just with Ingram, I see the skill set is remarkable. I don't think that he stands out as a guy to me that is. He's not Kevin Durant. He's like Kevin Durant light, and so you don't have that Durant thing, but he also doesn't have that killer instinct. I know Durant doesn't necessarily either, but he's just so good that it doesn't matter. So yeah, I mean, I've said this the other day. I don't think the Celtics 2 stars are superstars, and I don't know that they'll ever get to that point. But I do feel more comfortable with the fact that they've had in their young careers a lot more success in terms of winning than Brandon Ingram. Now, and Zion, the durability I mentioned, and also this year he's played and the team still has not really improved all that much. So I don't know. Listen, he's in his second year, and sometimes it takes players a while to figure out how to win in the league. But I am surprised that they're sitting right now behind teams like the Kings and the Grizzlies and the Spurs in the West right now, and they're only a half game up on a team like the Thunder, who have basically decided to completely rebuild. So, considering those two guys play every night, and they have Steven Adams and Lonzo Ball, I'm not sure why they haven't been able to at least get into the conversation of trying to get into the playoffs this year. And
Yeah, no, I think
it's
they've
been
underachieved.
they
I
haven't been
agree
able to
with
turn
you.
the corner.
No, I think that both of these teams have underachieved this year, right? The Celtics and New Orleans. We were hoping for better from both of them. I mean, New Orleans seems to be on national TV like once a week, and it's because obviously of Zion. I'm not a big Stan Van Gundy fan. I love him on Twitter. I agree with a lot of his politics, but as a coach, I think he maybe is past his prime. Maybe his way of doing things doesn't fit into today's NBA. So I don't think they're going to move off of Stan Van Gundy after 1 year. But I think it's a good conversation because we're talking about three Duke guys here, right? And Tatum, Zion, and Ingram, and then Brown is from Cal. So we're talking about four guys that went to really good schools. So there is kind of that built-in arrogance, when you go to Duke and even Cal. So we're talking about four guys that probably, I don't think they have maturity issues, but they have to learn that the game is maybe tougher than they think it is.
It is funny how Duke for a long time, it was obviously a premier program, but didn't produce like the NBA star level players. And now with the one and dones being so popular, Coach K has obviously shifted his recruiting strategy, and now you're starting to see a ton of these top guys come out of Duke and really perform at the NBA level. It was like a punchline for long, like they were, great at Duke, and then they'd come out and they'd be, middling to bad in the NBA. And now, I mean, they're putting out top picks every year. So it just shows you that college basketball has changed so much in terms of how
but they've had
teams
their
view
misses
who
too,
they
though,
want.
right? But they've had their misses too, Jet, right? I mean, like every program does. Not every program is going to produce great NBA players. I mean, I think Kentucky's produced more top-level players than Duke. North Carolina, in totality, has probably produced more top-level players than Duke. But even recently, you're talking about Wendell Carter Jr. was a high pick. He's been okay.
Yeah. Jahlil Okafor.
Jahlil Okafor was the third pick. What was Begley the third was the second pick in the draft, taken before Luka Doncic. He's not really all that good. So they've had their misses. Now Tatum has been pretty much a home run. I think he still has room to grow. Ingram has been maybe a triple. We'll call it that. I think Zion has a chance to be a grand slam. I think of all these guys, he has a chance to be. Kyrie, without question, is the best pro player to come out of Duke, even more so than Grant Hill. Grant Hill was great. Kyrie's at another level. I mean, the only problem with Kyrie, he's not as.
And he only played like
Grant
9
Hill.
games at Duke too.
Yeah, and you still knew. It took about 9 minutes to see him and say, "Wow, this guy is pretty special." I mean, in terms of pure talent and at times productivity, he's the best player to come out of Duke without question. Grant Hill, in totality, has had the best career. He's the only Duke player that's in the Hall of Fame, and he got in there partly because he was great in college as well, because that's obviously factored into the basketball Hall of Fame. Kyrie will be in the Hall of Fame at some point. I don't even doubt that. He won a championship, hit a big shot. He's had a marvelous career, albeit he's not a durable guy. And I think Zion and Tatum are on that track. I don't think Ingram's on that track, and I wouldn't say that Brown's on that track yet. But I kind of look at Ingram and Brown as pretty similar. And just personal taste, I would take Zion over Tatum. That's how I came to this. I just thought the poll would be closer than 73-27, but a lot of it has to do with I've got more Celtics followers than Pelicans followers.
Yeah, I mean, that was your mistake thinking it'd be closer, Sap. So that's on you.
I make a lot of mistakes, Jet. I do.
You do. And of course, Twitter only gives you those 4 poll options, so you couldn't do, the poll you wanted with every duo in the NBA and see how that one shakes out.
I went with the young duos. I mean, like, I would have put Luka in there, but is Porzingis really in the same class as these 4 players? He can be if he's healthy, but certainly Luka's the best player of all these young players, without question. But yeah,
I guess another one would be like Towns and Edwards now would be an interesting question.
Yeah, Minnesota, man, they can't get anything right. I mean, Embiid and Simmons. Embiid's been in the league since 2014, although he hasn't
Yeah,
played as much as some other players that were drafted in that year. I mean, Embiid Simmons would be certainly an interesting duo. I'm going with this one out of these two because of Zion's age, and I think Zion's going to be the face of the league in about 3 or 4 years. That's my feeling. Wrote the column about it. We had that discussion last week on one of the podcasts. I think his ceiling is that
got
high,
to
and I
start
think he will
winning.
help recruit. Absolutely, you've got to start winning. Even if you get to the playoffs and lose in the first round, especially in the West, that's still better than not making the playoffs. Because Jordan, his first year got to the playoffs, lost to the Bucks, I believe, in the first round. Second year, made it to the playoffs, coming off a broken foot where he missed about 3 months. Scared the hell out of the Celtics, maybe the greatest team ever. Even though they got swept, he kept them close in 2 of those games at the old Boston Garden. And even LeBron, by his 3rd year, was making the playoffs. By his, 4th year, he was in the NBA Finals. So,
Yeah.
Zion's got to start winning at some point. And again, maybe he's just a player that's going to put up great numbers and he's not a force multiplier. I don't know if any of these guys are force multipliers. We've talked about Tatum and Brown. They seem to play in a vacuum. Ingram is a pretty good passer and facilitator, but who's he ever made better? I think Zion maybe has a chance to be the best of the group as a force multiplier, because I also think he probably has the highest ceiling defensively. He's been a little bit of a disappointment defensively so far, but I think he can become a very good defensive player.
Yeah, I actually Brown is the best of that group defensively right now.
I can buy
by far.
into that. Yeah.
I do think Tatum has the highest ceiling defensively because of his wingspan being so long, and but it's sort of irrelevant right now to speculate on who's going to be the best of them defensively. But I think it's a fair argument. Either way, you can't go wrong. I mean, I think most GMs would probably shade towards the Pelicans purely because of Zion, not because of Ingram, but because the potential of Zion being a guy that you can be the best player in a championship team. I think it's becoming abundantly clear that Tatum and Brown and obviously Ingram, none of those guys could be the best player on a championship team. And Zion is just, you don't know yet. So it's a good question, Sap. Credit to you for a good poll question. And we'll see how the next couple of years will, answer that question. That's the only way to know is time. So that will do it for this edition of the Pick and Roll NBA podcast with Jet and Sap, presented by Full Press Coverage. Make sure to check out their website, fullpresscoverage.com, for great articles, podcasts, you name it, they have it. Welcome back into the Pick and Roll NBA podcast with Jet and Sap, presented by Full Press Coverage. I hope everybody is enjoying their weekend. Today, we have a little bit of a special show for you. Not special in that there's anything groundbreaking, but special in that we have 3 bombastic guys saying bombastic things. We're going to take a look at Sir Charles Barkley, Draymond Green, and a name we haven't heard from in a while, but it's, he's one of the NBA greats. Phil Jackson had some interesting things to say about his time with the New York Knicks. So let's get right in with Charles Barkley. Charles Barkley is on TV a lot right now because he's been covering the tournament, which is always a blast because he has no idea who's playing or who any of the players are. He is also still covering the NBA, and he does make the rounds on podcasts and news channels. You see him pop up on Fox or CNN. He's all over the place. You can't turn the TV without seeing Charles Barkley. Barkley is never known to shy away from an opinion, Sap, and sometimes his opinions ruffle people the wrong way. This one, I'm sure, is to get to you specifically. Here's what Charles Barkley had to say in regards to the current state of the NBA and the best player in the league. Right now, no disrespect to LeBron or Giannis or anybody, but James Harden might be the best basketball player in the world, period. Kobe and Jordan were better players from a guard standpoint, but as far as offensively, they couldn't shoot threes like him. Every time he goes to the basket, he's going to hit somebody and get 2 free throws. So Charles Barkley says James Harden's the best player on the planet right now and the best offensive guard ever. Thoughts?
Well, I love Charles Barkley. He's one of my favorite guys. I mean, I think the TNT show with Barkley, Shaq, Kenny Smith, and Ernie Johnson is the best in all of sports, whether it's football, basketball, baseball, pick any sport. That's a great show. It feels like a radio show because the 4 of them just kind of, seem like 4 friends having conversation. The first part, as far as James Harden being the best player in the world right now, I think he's a leading candidate for MVP. I'm not going to disagree with that. But I think we're forgetting that there's another half of the court that you have to play. And James Harden occasionally has had some years where his defensive numbers weren't atrocious, but oftentimes he looks not engaged defensively. So I've always felt that to be the best player in the sport, you have to also be a pretty good or an elite defender. And LeBron James still remains the best player in basketball. Now, in a given month, is he better than James Harden? Maybe not. I think the last month before LeBron got hurt, his play was going down a little bit, which is generally the case with LeBron. There's usually about a 3 or 4 week stretch in the year where he kind of amps it on down and then, amps it back up for the postseason. Harden's not a really good defensive player. We get that. Offensively, he's magnificent, but I don't think he's the best player in the league. Now, I'm going to elevate him higher than, say, when the season started, especially early in the season when he was in Houston and he mailed it in for 8 to 10 games with the Rockets. That's why I push back a little bit about him being the leader for MVP, because it's the 2020-2021 season,
Right, should be
not just the
penalized
21 season. He should be penalized. It's the MVP of the entire season, not just 82%
He
of your
actively
games playing
tanked the team.
Right, that's never a good thing. That's not leadership, right? So you have to question that. So he got his way out. Now he's with Brooklyn. They look like the best team in basketball. He's clearly a top 3 MVP candidate because Durant's been out for a month and a half. Kyrie, comes and goes as he pleases. And Durant and Harden's been the one constant there. So absolutely, I think he's an MVP candidate. But on the defensive side of the ball, he's, to me, a liability, whereas LeBron leads the NBA in defensive win shares right now. And we know what LeBron can do defensively when engaged. And he was engaged in the bubble last year, led to a championship. And when he was in Cleveland, he was engaged when necessary. Same thing in Miami. James Harden doesn't have that type of ability. I also think that if you're going to declare someone as the best player in the league, that player has to show an ability to elevate his game in the postseason, something James Harden's never done. There's a few theories behind that. Because he's been so ball dominant, that I think by the postseason, he is quite frankly exhausted. He also doesn't strike me as a guy that works that hard to stay in shape like LeBron James does. Also, he lives at the free throw line. That's great in the regular season, Jet. That doesn't work in the postseason. Karl Malone had the same issue. Karl Malone would go to the free throw line 10, 12 times a game in the regular season. You get to the postseason, the referees swallow that whistle. You're not going to the line that often, and his play sunk in the postseason. Same thing with James Harden. So to declare him as the best player in basketball, I can't go there because he's a liability defensively, and I want to see him elevate his game in the postseason. He's had a marvelous 2.5, 3 months with Brooklyn. Great. He may win an MVP, leading the league in assists, averaging 25 a game, carrying that team. But to declare him as the best player in basketball, no. I've always felt that really for the last 7, 8 years, the only discussion was LeBron and Kevin Durant. And I always would push back against Durant because Durant can be a good defensive player, not as good as LeBron defensively, but also Durant's nowhere near as durable as LeBron James. I mean, Kevin Durant's played 19 games in the last 2 years, so I can't put him into the equation. So I'm going to have to disagree with Sir Charles about James Harden being the best player in the game right now.
Yeah, I think you made a great point about the postseason stuff too. I mean, if he's saying like right now, then yeah, it's a regular season thing, and you could certainly make the argument James Harden's been one of the great regular season players, not just recently, but of all time, because
Sure.
he's, triple doubles, scoring outrageous numbers. So yeah, regular season, tremendous. But yeah, he has wilted a little bit in the postseason, and for reasons that you just mentioned, Sap, I think conditioning, the free throw shooting, which like Barkley said in his own statement, like he gets to the line whenever he wants. It's a nightmare to watch. It's not a pretty brand of basketball at all, but it is very effective for him. But the biggest thing is as you alluded to, Seth, the defense. I can't elevate somebody to the best player in basketball when he doesn't play both ends. And I actually think he's improved a little bit defensively, but he's not a one-on-one defender. He's at best a team scheme defensive player. To me, the 3 best players in the league have distanced themselves to the point where I think it's pretty clear. My 3 best players are LeBron when healthy, obviously Durant when healthy, and Giannis in my mind, because all 3 of them play defense. If Kawhi Leonard would, grace us with a full season of playing, I put him in that conversation too, because he's elite both ways. James Harden, I can't deny he's the best scorer in the league. He is the most outstanding scorer in the NBA right now. This year, Bradley Beal's leading the league in scoring. It's still James Harden because of how often he can get to the line and his
More than
shooting.
Durant, though. I still think Durant is the best scorer in the league because he'll get 30
Durant's
on 12 shots.
The most varied scorer, but I think that Harden's just like he puts the amount of points he puts up. I mean, because he goes to the line so much, so he's putting up bulk points. So yeah, Durant can score in more ways than Harden. I'm not arguing that. I'm just saying Harden puts up more points because of the way he plays, which again is maddening to watch. I hate it. It's a very ugly brand of basketball, but it's made him a lot of money and it's won him a lot of games in the regular season. But I'm not putting him when LeBron and Durant are out right now, both with injuries. I think Giannis is the best player in the game, and then I would say I might consider James Harden, but if I'd also say Kawhi Leonard because to me he's the best on-ball defender in the league, and so I could see him dominate a game both ways. He also, I know you don't like to hear this, but has elevated his game in the playoffs.
Yes, he has. No, without question. I'll give him that. I can't give that to James Harden. Giannis, I can't give that to either. His play goes down in the postseason, quite frankly, because he doesn't have a varied enough offensive game. And when you're ready to play a team in a 7-game series, you can really game plan against that player. If you're dipping in and out,
but at least he'll play defense. If he's not scoring, he'll still be giving you defense. If Harden's not scoring, he's giving you nothing in the postseason.
And Giannis is in phenomenal shape, and he busts his ass. I mean, Giannis was one of the few guys in the All-Star game that looked like he was playing at a very high level. That's why I thought that his team was going to win the game because he was just playing hard. He just plays hard every moment that he's out there. So, yeah, I can buy into that. Harden's marvelous, and I agree with you. Sometimes it's really frustrating to watch, maybe because he's left-handed. Normally, I always think of lefties being smooth. Like I remember Steve Young as a quarterback was always smooth. Pitchers that are left-handed are smooth. But let me make a comparison to baseball. One of the reasons that we put Mookie Betts so high as, at worst, the second best player in baseball behind Mike Trout is because of his defense, right? I mean, Mookie can hit for average, hit for power, steal bases, but he's an elite defender, so we elevate him up there. Trout's also an elite defender. James Harden, to me, is a guy who, is Miguel Cabrera, right? He can win a triple crown, but he does nothing defensively or on the base paths. And that's what I kind of get with James Harden. He's not going to help you defensively. So at no point can I say this is the best player in the league. Now, he could be the most valuable player, although I think it still has to be held against him what he did in Houston. Got to hold that against him.
It should. He did the opposite of being valuable.
Exactly. He ate his way out of Houston, and that's not what a leader does at all.
So as far as the other comment, him being the best offensive guard of all time, Charles's point was that they couldn't shoot threes like him. I think that's a little unfair because, especially with Jordan and really with Kobe until like the last couple of years of Kobe's career, threes weren't that popular. That wasn't the game plan. They weren't asked to do that. Harden will take 10 a game, no problem. Will take 10 threes in a game. Jordan, the first couple of years in his career, probably didn't take 10 in a season.
He was not a three-point shooter. Late in his career, he adapted enough, but the game still wasn't a three fest like it is now. Kobe obviously played later than Jordan, and Kobe became pretty accomplished at three later in his career, especially when he won his MVP in 2008. I can't hold that against Jordan and Kobe because it wasn't really part of the game back then. Larry Bird didn't take a lot of three-pointers, and Larry Bird's one of the greatest shooters the sport's ever seen. It just wasn't something that you did. Go back to old box scores. Even the Lakers-Celtics in the 85 or the 87 finals, you don't see a lot of threes. I remember watching the games. Occasionally, Byron Scott would chuck up a three or Michael Cooper would chuck up a three. The Celtics, Bird occasionally would, Danny Ainge would. You just didn't see players shooting threes. So to hold that against Jordan and Kobe, I think, is unfair. Ask defenders, who would you rather guard, Kobe or Jordan or James Harden? And I would think that defenders would say, I'd rather defend James Harden. There's probably a way to contain him or stop him. There was no way to stop or contain Michael Jordan or Kobe Bryant. They just were too good. Their footwork was impeccable. Their athleticism was through the roof. Harden's not a great athlete. He kind of does it in a herky-jerky fashion. He goes to the line a lot. And look, when Harden elevates his performance in the postseason the way Jordan and Kobe did, maybe we can have that discussion. He's got a wide range of skills. There's no question about it. But I can't hold the fact that he's a better, quote unquote, better three-point shooter than Jordan and Kobe against those players, because it really wasn't a big part of the game back in the 80s, 90s, and even in the early 2000s. The three-point shot became more and more prevalent 8-9 years ago.
I pulled it up on Basketball Reference, Sep. For Kobe Bryant, the most threes he ever took in a season was 518. That was in 2005, 2006, where he shot 35% on them.
Right.
The most threes Michael Jordan ever took in a season was 96, 97. He took 297 threes. He shot 38% on them.
That's fine.
The most threes James Harden has taken in a season, Sap, 1,028 in 2018. That's the most he's taken. This season, he's already taken 232. He's had seasons where he's taken 843, 756, 722. I mean, just blowing those three-point totals out of the water in terms of how many attempts he's had at it. And James Harden, also, the percentages aren't as good as those guys from the three-point line. So he's just hitting more because he's taking more. It's not that he's better at it. He's taking way more.
The year that he took over 1,000, which is 12 a game, which is the only guy in the league who should be taking 12 threes a game is Steph Curry. He's the greatest shooter ever. What was his shooting percentage that particular year when he took over 1,000 3-pointers?
37.
Okay, and Jordan's year that he took nearly 300, which is a pittance compared to what Harden took, he was at 38%. So if Jordan chucked up more threes, he would have hit more. Obviously, that goes without saying. It was a different game 25 years ago. So I can't hold that against Jordan and Kobe. Come on. I mean, look, Harden's a marvelous player. Those guys, and I'm not going to start using assassin and all that stuff. That gets overused somewhat. But those guys were unstoppable. They were unstoppable. Athleticism, desire. They're both sociopaths, right? I mean, may Kobe rest in peace, and Michael Jordan still with us, thankfully. Those guys were insane. Harden seems like a really gifted guy who's playing in an era where he can get to the line a lot and chuck up threes. Great. He's awesome. But I'm not going to put him in the same class of those guys. It's just on offense. Forget the other end of the court, because those guys were miles ahead of him. But Sir Charles did say it was about offense.
Jordan never attempted more than 100 threes in a season until his 6th year in the NBA.
Right. Yeah, no,
it just is a different game. The three-point thing, Charles Barkley knows more about basketball than you and I will ever. He's forgotten more about basketball than you and I ever.
He doesn't watch much of it, but I do love Charles.
But that point just doesn't make any sense to me, because it's a completely different game. It'd be like in football trying to judge running backs now versus running backs who carried the ball 40 times a game, in the 1920s. It's not the same thing.
Or how do you compare quarterbacks from even the 80s to quarterbacks now, when wide receivers were held down the field so they couldn't get open as easily as they do now, and quarterbacks would regularly get hit 2-3 seconds after they got rid of the ball. Now, if you do that, the defensive player gets suspended. So it's a different era that we're playing in.
It's totally different.
Yep.
So that's what Charles Barkley had to say. Draymond Green, we'll get to the next bombastic person now. Draymond Green, he's never one to not boast about himself, which, he's won championships and he has the right to do that. And that's why he's a really fun personality. He said that he is the best defensive player in the history of the NBA, a comment that I personally find laughable. Sap, I was surprised to hear that you don't.
I don't find it laughable, and here's the reason. When we think of great defensive players, we normally think of rim protectors. So obviously the first name that comes to mind as an old person is Bill Russell, right? I mean, Bill Russell's biggest asset, besides being the smartest player of his era, the best leader in sports, the most clutch player of his era, was the best defensive player of his era. So he's the first name that comes to mind. And then other centers that were intimidating defensive forces. Will Chamberlain, Kareem was a really good defensive player, as was Olajuwon. So you think of the big guys first. Well, that's not necessarily needed now because rim protector is something it's nice to have, but it's not necessary. I mean, Rudy Gobert won Defensive Player of the Year. He's considered a good rim protector. And the last time he faced Joel Embiid nearly stuffed him in the basket.
Lit him up.
And scored 40 points on him. So I don't buy into that. You normally don't think of small guys as great defenders. I would say among the smaller guys, the best I've seen recently would be Chris Paul. Great defensive player, great feet, great hands, incredible mind. So I would say he's the best of the smaller defenders.
Marcus Smart.
Your guy, yeah, exactly. He's a little bigger than Chris Paul. He's more 6'3", 6'4" than 5'11", 6 feet. It's the mid-sized guys that always intrigue me. So I'm talking about the likes of Dennis Rodman, who was a great defensive player. Michael Jordan was a great defensive player. Kobe was a near great defensive player. LeBron can be a great defensive player when he's engaged, which is what he is in big moments. Again, he's got more responsibility than any other player that's ever played. So sometimes he saves a little bit on the defensive end, but when necessary, he's a great defensive player. I think Bruce Bowen is someone I'll throw out there. Gary Payton right there as a point guard like Chris Paul. I mean, could you picture a backcourt of Chris Paul and Gary Payton together? That would be a nightmare for the other team.
Bigger than Chris Paul. I think Gary Payton was like 6'4". Right?
6'4". And Gary Payton, remember in The Last Dance, talked about how he frustrated Michael Jordan in the 1996 finals.
Yeah, Jordan did not agree with that sentiment.
If you look at the numbers, he covered Jordan in games 4, 5, and 6. Jordan averaged 17
did not like
games.
that.
Well, Jordan doesn't like anybody pushing back against him. In games 4, 5, and 6, Jordan averaged 17 a game and shot about 33% from the floor. Peyton did a really good job. You're not stopping Michael Jordan. If they had played another game, Jordan would have figured it out and probably went for 40. Draymond Green is maybe the most versatile defensive player we've ever seen. Can I make that case? I mean, he's a rim protector at 6'6".
No.
He can cover stretch fours, which is vital in today's NBA. He can switch off of pick and rolls. I think he's one of the most versatile defenders we've ever seen. And I think playing defense now is more difficult than it's ever been. The hand check has been outlawed pretty much in the NBA. But the players today have to cover a wider variance of players, and they have to cover more of the court, right? So let's say Golden State's playing Brooklyn and he's covering Kevin Durant. How the hell do you cover Kevin Durant? Because he can shoot from 40 feet. He can put it on the floor. He can post up. I think the offensive game is at the highest it's ever been. So defense is tougher to play now than it's ever been. I'm not saying that Draymond Green is the greatest defensive player ever. I think he's one of the most versatile defensive players ever. So I don't think his comments are that outlandish. I mean, I love Draymond, and I think Draymond is going to be great when he retires on TV or whatever he wants to do, making Subway commercials with Jayson Tatum, which I find hilarious because you could not find two more different people than Jayson Tatum and Draymond Green. I mean, if you put Draymond Green's heart and desire into Jayson Tatum's body, you'd have an all-time great player. But I'm going to say that Draymond, if he could have just used a few more words and said versatile, maybe one word, most versatile defender ever, I would buy into that because he can cover a wide variance of guys.
I don't even think he's the best defensive player of his era. I think that's Kawhi Leonard in my mind. There's a lot of talk about this when he first said it earlier in the week, and people were putting out their lists of, who are the best defensive players ever. The best defensive player I've ever seen over a lengthy period of time was Scottie Pippen, and he was absent from a lot of these lists.
I forgot.
I was shocked. I thought he was the best and Jordan is an all-time great defender. Rodman's an all-time great defender. I thought Scottie Pippen was the best defensive player in the Bulls.
You're right. I'm surprised. And again, Pippen sometimes falls through the cracks because he played with Jordan. And I always had Pippen as a top 30 player. And anytime I put my list out, and I'll change it a little bit. People go, "What's Pippen doing on there?" I go, "Well, he won 6 titles. We do, count these titles are very important. He was the best defensive player of his era." That's how good they were defensively, though. When they had Pippen, Jordan, Rodman, Kukoc was long. He wasn't a great defender, but he was long. I mean, they could just shut down teams. They held the Jazz in one finals game to like 57 points. Well, they had Karl Malone.
Insane.
I understand why
and
they
Pippen,
sucked.
And talk about versatile. I mean, he could do everything.
Right, he could cover everybody. He in the 91 finals, so you're too young to remember this because you were probably 2 at the time. And I was
2, yep.
I was a huge Magic fan. So it was finally Magic, Jordan in the NBA
Orlando
finals,
Magic
right?
fan, yep.
Yes, no, not Orlando Magic fan, Magic Johnson. And the first game of the finals, Jordan was on Magic, and the Lakers won that game. And Magic had a triple-double. After that game, Pippen checked Magic, shut him down, and the Bulls won in 5 games. So to your point, Pippen was probably the better defender than Jordan. Again, he didn't have as much responsibility as Jordan. So that's part of it. Like on any given possession, Jordan could clamp down and shut pretty much anyone down. But Pippen's definitely in that discussion. I think Draymond has some similar qualities to Pippen. It's just it's tougher to play defense now than it was back then. You're covering more of the court.
I'd say,
you got all different types of players.
Listen, I'm obviously, I was born in '89, so I grew up on '90s basketball. So two of my favorite all-time defensive players that I love watching were, as I mentioned, Gary Payton and Scottie Pippen. In terms of guys that I've seen, though, if you were like, I need a stop here, we need a stop on this possession, the best guy I've seen at that is Kevin Garnett. Was just, I mean, like, because he was a psycho. So he would put everything into one defensive possession. And talk about a versatile defensive player, because he's 7 feet tall and he was guarding guards.
He's in that discussion too. There's a bunch of guys. I think you have to separate though, right? You have to separate the bigs. Although Garnett is a big at 7 foot tall, he could cover smaller players. Like you almost have to take Russell, Chamberlain, all those guys out of the equation. They're bigs. They're
I think if you don't take bigs out of it, I think it's it's Russell. Obvious. I think by a mile, a country mile.
It led to 11 championships. I mean, there's no disputing that, and that was probably his most famous skill, among one of his best skills. So yeah, but as far as guys that can cover a wide variety of players, Pippen's in there, Draymond Green's in there. I don't think Garnett's going to, in his prime, even check point guards. I mean, that's asking a little bit too much. Whereas I think Draymond can cover a center or he can cover a point guard, because the game is different though than it was when Garnett was playing.
Yeah, I mean, it's also nice that, the Warriors are up by 50 on a lot of these teams. So, he didn't have to play as intense defense. It's not like he shut down LeBron James when they played in the finals, as you like to point out, Seb.
No one shuts down LeBron James. I mean,
they didn't even have him defending LeBron James. They had Iguodala defending LeBron James.
Well, Iguodala did, yeah. And Iguodala got schooled by LeBron. It's just that, in comparison to the first 3 games when LeBron was averaging 39, he only averaged like 29 the last 3 games. But don't forget with Draymond, Game 7 of the 2016 finals, when the Cavaliers finished that series off by winning games 5, 6, and 7, Draymond got suspended for Game 5. But in Game 7, he had a near triple-double. I think he had 9 rebounds, 12 assists, and I think he hit for 31 points. He was the best player on Golden State in that 7th game, because Steph sucked in Game 7 of that finals. Draymond kept them in it, and ultimately the Cavaliers were able to win that game and series. But I think it's so easy to say this guy is crazy, because we kind of think of Draymond as being a little crazy. But if he just threw in the word versatile, then I think people would have bought a little more. But I do like your choice of Scottie Pippen. I think Scottie Pippen is a guy that you forget about because he played with Jordan. Isn't it almost a case of when, and look, Jordan's better than Pippen, and I think in baseball, A-Rod's better than Derek Jeter, but Jeter was the shortstop. A-Rod was the third baseman for the Yankees. But for 10 years, the best shortstop on the Yankees was Alex Rodriguez. They just didn't play him there because they wouldn't dare take Jeter out of shortstop. Right. So it's almost like Jordan's our greatest defender. We don't want to offend him, even though Pippen's better, because Pippen didn't have the same personality like Jordan, because Pippen was always the guy that was, getting yelled at by the coaches, getting yelled at by Jordan, grew up in extreme poverty and was just, kind of a self-made player.
Yeah, went to Central Arkansas. Jordan went to North Carolina.
Yeah, I mean, Jordan came from a middle-class background. Pippen, remember the stories in The Last Dance about Pippen? He had like 2 relatives in wheelchairs with cerebral palsy. They had dirt floors.
Yeah, he had a tough life.
I mean,
he didn't make it. He made some of the things easy for, to punch down on Pippen because, he quit on the team at one point.
Yeah, he did.
So, but, and that was his own fault. But yeah, I mean.
Although Jordan retired in 93 after winning his 3rd straight title, the Bulls went 57-25 in 92-93, won the title. The next year without Jordan, they still won 55 games. I don't think you'd ever see that happen to a LeBron team. If LeBron left the team, they usually go from 57 wins to like 27 wins. That's one of the big reasons.
Maybe if he had a teammate as good as Scottie Pippen, maybe they would be okay. I mean, when he left Cleveland, he left the cupboard pretty thin.
As your former mentor, maybe still is your mentor, Glenn Ordway would say, you're proving my point. He didn't get to play with players like that. And when he played with Wade and Bosh in Miami, what did Miami do after he left?
Oh, they
Mic
got
drop.
old.
Mic drop.
They got old. Let's get to our third bombastic guy from the NBA today, Sap. Phil Jackson, who has been living on a ranch in Montana for the last. It's not like we've heard from him a lot recently.
Branch Davidian.
But
who knows where he is?
He decided to do a podcast with his former player, Kobe Carl, son of former NBA head coach George Karl, who we could do another podcast on because there's a lot of players who have a lot of not so nice things to say about George Karl. They were talking about his tenure with the New York Knicks, which I think you can agree, Sep, was an abject disaster, just a straight up failure.
Yeah, because he didn't have Jordan, Pippen, Kobe, or Shaq. It's kind of funny how that works.
And Phil Jackson's not happy about the perception. As he went as far as to say, I understand what Donald Trump had to live with probably for his first 3.5 years in office with media and just the very short term of being in that seat with the Knicks. He had some other quotes here about, you remember he had that thing about spots on the leopard with Carmelo Anthony that some people said was racist. He pushed that back. But I think the money quote is I understand what Trump had to live with and that the media was not fair to him during his tenure in New York. Is there any merit to him blaming the media for what went wrong with the Knicks when he was running that team?
No, because was like Frank Isola making the picks for the Knicks or anybody else that was covering the team or any columnist? Was Peter Vesey? Not even sure if Peter was still working in the media at that point. Were they making picks?
First 3 seasons in New York, 17-65, 32-50, 31-51.
Yeah, and outside of Porzingis, what were drafts? The drafts were not very good, right? I mean, Porzingis was good, and then they moved on from Porzingis because of contract, stalemate.
Well,
and also the fact
he
that
didn't like
he's
him.
Injury prone. They didn't like him. Yeah,
they had an issue. Yeah. So this is, Phil Jackson's obviously an arrogant guy. I mean, that comes with the territory of winning that many titles. But this is ridiculous. I think he's just somebody that he's not knowing how to deal with failure. And this was a huge, huge failure and blemish on his, which was to this point, pretty spotless resume. And this was his last stop in the NBA. And it was a disaster. I keep using that word, but it was. And because the Knicks have been a joke. But to say, I understand what Trump had to live with so he's going to take the Donald Trump route and blame the media for everything that's gone wrong and say fake news,
fake news, Jet.
What's he talking about? The media has nothing to do with how well the team played. He's making decisions. He built the roster. He was given the keys to the car, and the team, they sucked.
Didn't he give Derek Fisher like a huge contract to coach the team, and Fisher lasted 1 year with no coaching experience? So
and I don't believe his coach since.
No, not at all. So it's like he made the moves. He had carte blanche there. I would think. Weren't they paying him $10 million a year to run basketball operations? And this is 7-8 years ago. It's not now.
I think it was more than that.
It
was an insane amount of money.
It was insane. It was maybe 15 million or 20. It was like this incredible amount of money. And he wasn't even working in New York. Wasn't he working from the ranch or the cabin or wherever the hell he is in Montana, Wyoming? You can do that now. I mean, especially with the pandemic.
There were pictures of him sleeping at Knicks games all the time. He fell asleep.
Who wasn't sleeping at Knicks games? At least the Knicks now are watchable, right? They're a 500 team, and you got Thibodeau's doing a great job and Julius Randle. So at least they're entertaining to watch. That team was horrible. No, he's insane. Here's Phil Jackson.
Here's what he went on to say. He said, you had a media that was decidedly against the organization, and they were looking for whatever they could do to throw aspirations on the organization. I think James Dolan felt like I was facing too big of an uphill climb, and he relieved me of the job because he saw the media was just going to be backing Carmelo in this situation, and I was going to be the guy that was taking the lumps. I mean, there was a lot of distortion that went into it, and texting and media was a big part of it.
Texting?
I don't know what I'm reading it verbatim. I don't know what the hell he meant by that.
like texting back and forth. Was it like a new thing that he just found out about, that texting was being done in 2000 and when was he there? 2014, 15, whatever the years were. It wasn't there a long time because even Dolan, as big as a boob as he is, kind of said, well, we've got to move on from this guy. But Phil Jackson, it almost sounds a little bit like Belichick last year was blaming the salary cap. That they sucked last year because of the salary cap, because they always spent to the cap, which is not true. Why. Yeah, it's the only reason. Not your bad drafts or not your decision to say, you know what, I got the greatest quarterback in the history of the sport. Let's move on from him. We'll go.
Well, this offseason, he's come as close to as he can as admitting a mistake. He's not going to say it
without
in public,
admitting
but
it.
Phil Jackson still has not. I mean, this is not admitting a mistake. Here, the article that I'm reading on NBC Sports points out. They said the media did write plenty of unflattering stories about Jackson, but Jackson was notably unreachable during a trade deadline, fell asleep during a draft prospects workout, couldn't get his computer to work during a free agent pitch, and was always unprepared in his meetings. Those are facts. Yeah, those are stories that are sourced.
He sounds like Donald Trump then, right? Not prepared, computer wasn't working. Trump always had his phone working so he could tweet out. Yeah, I mean, the game passed him by, obviously. And you know what? You didn't have Jordan, Pippen, Kobe, or Shaq. That's the big difference, and that's why he won 11 titles with those 4 all-time great players. He could have done whatever he wanted to do. Trade up in the draft, trade down in the draft, approach free agents. He did none of it. He mailed it in for whatever amount of money he was making. He rested on his laurels, and he was a disaster, and he should just go away. It's not the media's fault. Do you think the media wants the team they're covering to suck? Is that really any benefit to anyone? I mean,
here in Boston they do. Yeah.
Right. Well, look at this. Look at the Patriots, right? The Patriots have been awesome for 20 years. People that have covered that team, whether it be from, Tommy Curran to pick anyone else, they've built a nice cottage industry for themselves, right? Writing books with players.
I'll rephrase. They want the team to be good and fall short of expectations. That is the dream for a lot of the people in the media. They want them to get to the championship game and lose.
You really believe that? See, I think they just root for the story, which is what we all do, right? We all root for the story. But, I mean, okay, I'm going to use 2 examples of probably the 2 biggest media members in the city of Boston, because talk radio in Boston, trumps, no pun intended, but it trumps, newspapers at this point, TVs, stations as well. I mean, Shaughnessy still has a lot of cachet as a columnist. The 2 biggest names in the city are Felger and Maz, right? Well, Felger covered the Patriots in the early 2000s when they were winning Super Bowls, and Maz covered the Red Sox when they were winning World Series, and they were able to take that and get on radio, build their brand, and then move over to the Sports Hub, and now they have one of the most successful shows in the country. So I think it benefited them that those teams were that good. If the Patriots had sucked all those years, or the Red Sox had sucked all those years, do we know if those guys would have been?
No, you're right. It's when the team is irrelevant. It's not
That's
good
the worst
for anybody.
Yeah. Do you think the Celtics scribes actually aren't rooting for the Celtics to win a championship? It seems like they take
the Celtics more seriously. I'm saying
they're like
Felger and Maz. The talk radio people are rooting for teams to fall short of high expectations.
Yeah. No, because that's the story, right? I mean, what Super Bowl do we talk about the most still is the Patriots losing to the Eagles, right? Without Malcolm Butler, or the Patriots losing twice.
People still
twice
call
to the
about
Giants.
that.
We're not waxing poetic about the Patriots win over Carolina in Super Bowl 38. Which, by the way, probably
people talk way more about the Giants once than any Super Bowl the Patriots have won.
And that Carolina game, of the 9 Super Bowls they played in, was probably, I'd say, that and the Seattle win were the 2 best pure football games of the run, and they won both of them. But we talk more about the losses.
Sap, let me just end then with this story about the meeting, the failed free agency meeting. This is from Frank Isola, who again did not make the draft picks for the Knicks.
My man, I love Frank.
This story is from one of the last years of Phil Jackson's tenure in 2017. When Phil Jackson sat down with a free agent last July, the meeting got off to an awkward start when Jackson could not get his computer to work. General manager Steve Mills had to step in and start the video of how Jackson envisioned the Knicks and the unnamed free agent would play. The video? Footage of the 1990 Chicago Bulls. The free agent in question was confused. He couldn't figure out if Jeff Hornacek or Jackson was the coach. Either way, the player signed elsewhere.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's perfect. I mean, if you're making that much money, just make sure you got someone with you. If I made $12 to $15 million a year, if I made like $1 million a year, I'd probably have a techie by my side. Or if you're not very good with that type of stuff, have someone that's going to help you through that. I don't think Belichick is great at this. I'm sure Stacey James with the Patriots or someone else is in charge of making sure that, Bill's able to do his conference calls, meet with the media, whatever the case may be. Phil Jackson is just such an unlikable boob who just, was lucky to coach 4 all-time great players.
Ultimately, his team's running the Knicks, even though it was the media's fault. They went 80-166 for his hard work. He was paid a total of $60 million for that record.
Yeah, so he was making $12 million a year. I remember it was a 5-year, $60 million contract.
Not bad.
No, so it was essentially, almost $1 million a win. That's if you can get that,
good.
God bless you. Yeah, no, he
was the highest paid executive in American sports.
I thought you were going to just say in America at that time. I mean, Bezos was making more with Amazon, I'm sure. But yeah, no,
he was making $2 million more a year than Theo Epstein at the time.
Yeah, and Theo's my guy. I love Theo. I want Theo to run for president someday.
Well, maybe he will. Maybe he'll be the first Jewish president.
I would vote for him.
We got no more bombastic, stupid quotes today, Sap. So that's going to do it for our show. Because unless you can find somebody else who says something dumb, well, you do a good job, but you're no Phil Jackson.
No, I'm not making $12 million a year. I'm not Charles Barkley. I'm not quite as big as Charles, and I never played defense as good as Draymond Green. But I like Charles a lot, and I love Draymond. I like when they're together because they've got some real tension there between them. You could see that. But Draymond, what I like about Draymond, he's anything but passive aggressive. He'll go after Barkley. Remember when Durant was on with Barkley and was like silent, which is typical Kevin Durant, passive aggressive.
Yeah, that was weird and also not that unexpected. Yeah, Durant's a weird guy. He's still. The other day I saw he was arguing on Twitter again with some random person. He can't help himself. He literally cannot help himself.
Nope.
But
nope.
We're not here to help him. We're here to, make fun of these people when they do stuff like that. So that will do it for the Pick and Roll NBA podcast with Jet and Sap, presented by Full Press Coverage. Again, check out their website, fullpresscoverage.com. You can find our podcast there. We're up on YouTube now. We're working out the kinks, but we're still going to put it up. We don't have any flashy visuals, but you can see our faces, and that's a good start. And Sap, any columns coming out that people should know about?
No, I was going to write a column off this poll that we talked about the last podcast with, who would you take, the Celtics duo or the New Orleans duo? So I'm going to stay away from that. I've been writing mostly about basketball because, we're doing the podcast and we're right in basketball season. It's basketball season. Plus there's like a million different people writing about football. Am I going to weigh in now on when's Garoppolo going to join the Patriots? And when is Aaron Rodgers leaving Green Bay, which I think is in a year? But I retweeted a column I wrote in April where I think Rodgers is going to play one more year in Green Bay and then move on and end up with the Patriots. So if it's Garoppolo and Newton and it doesn't work out this year, then maybe my guy is going to be throwing footballs for Bill Belichick and the Patriots. And I've already got LeBron coming here.
Rodgers coming to Boston. You get LeBron coming here. What the hell? Mike Trout, is he going to...
Well, I don't
really
have.
Soon.
Trout and Mookie are my two favorite players. But although Fernando Tatis
Sidney Crosby
Jr.,
coming by,
Mario Lemieux. But Mario's in retirement. My favorite current player. He's done. Mario's, he can probably still come out and score a couple of goals. My favorite current player is probably Alexander Ovechkin. I just love him. Maybe Roger Federer. Is there going to be a tournament in the Boston area that I can go
Boston
attend?
Lobsters. He could play for the Lobsters. Robert Kraft owned that team, right?
He did. That was the first franchise that Robert Kraft owned. Yeah.
Was that a all women's tennis or is it doubles tennis? What the hell was it?
No, it was world team tennis. So it was men's and women's. They had Martina Navratilova one summer, just after she had won her first Wimbledon. Yeah. I used to love. I love tennis. So it would be. I believe you'd have women's single, women's double, men's single, men's double, and maybe mixed. So you'd have 5 different matches. Very entertaining. I think they played at Boston University. And,
Go Lobsters.
Before the Agganis Center was built. Yeah, the Lobsters, which is actually a pretty cool nickname, right, for a Boston team. And
we got the Maine Red Claws, the G League team of the Celtics, which has housed many of their great players.
Yeah, they've got the best roster in the G League, right? I mean, they got all these guys that were drafted in the first round playing up there.
They constantly
likes to hoard players.
Yep.
Yeah,
They
it's
constantly
unfortunate.
stack it. But
I'm sure I'll be working on something. We'll see what happens this weekend and react to the buyout market and also all these trades that took place a couple days ago.
all right, sounds great, Sap. You can find him on Twitter at JohnSap25. You can find me on Twitter at JetStryer. Keep an eye out on our Twitter. We always tweet out the show and any other things we're doing. Again, we are the Pick and Roll NBA podcast with Jet and Sap, presented by Full Press Coverage.